Back with another episode. With me today, I have the co-founder of SuperRare, John Crain. Welcome. Thank you for being on. How you doing?
Doing great, Adam. Thanks for having me.
A part of season 7, all about creating content worth collecting, and I think there's no better person to talk about the subject than yourself. But before we get into that, okay, who are you, John? What does the world need to know about you? But more specifically, how'd you get your start into crypto?
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, everyone. John Crain, CEO and co-founder of SuperRare Labs. And yeah, my start into crypto starts a little while ago. I was living in New York. It was the spring of 2013, and I started going to a bunch of different meetups, and one of those meetups happened to be the New York Bitcoin meetup. And, little did I know at the time it was going to become kind of like an all-consuming interest. From the New York Bitcoin meetup, I got really interested in Ethereum and, worked with Consensus. And then as soon as I started reading about ERC 721, it was all I could think about.
Okay. But before crypto then, that's a very early time to get involved. I think people may say you got lucky, kind of being at the right place at the right time.
Did.
Do you get that a lot?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do you feel like that?
There's a huge part of it's luck, I would say. I also got lucky. So part of the longer story is that I was in an econ class in 2008. I studied architecture and civil engineering in my undergrad, so this is a required class, not something I was actually interested in at the time. And, the financial world was collapsing, and we had this super nice older teacher who came in one day, and he was very upset, and he puts the paper down on the table, and he looks at the whole class, and he just says, "I think we need to murder these fucking bankers." And I was just like, "Oh my word. This is not the class." I thought we were doing supply and demand curves, and now we're talking about murdering people. And that kind of sparked my interest in finance generally, and led me down the path of Austrian economics and hard currencies. So I was kind of into, I was in the rabbit hole of Austrian economics, and then had heard about Bitcoin, but always felt like it was a lot easier if you go meet some people who are already into it and pick their brain. And so there was certainly some luck, and it was a very meandering path. It was
so on that path, I'm trying to connect the touch point to creators. Where do creators come into the picture for you?
Yeah, so that's also a bit meandering, but probably it starts with me. So I've always been interested in art and math. So studying engineering and architecture. I ended up moving to New York and was working at an ad agency. So I knew all these super sick, 3D sculptors and animators. At the same time, I knew people who were really trying to make it in the more traditional, art scenes, going to art fairs and stuff. And I think the first art fair I went to, which was probably around the same time as I learned about Bitcoin. I just remember thinking it's really interesting. A lot of the art that I, like to make, whether it's a processing sketch or some other kind of open frameworks, weirdness, is just totally not represented here at the art fair. And all the commerce is about prints and, canvas and, maybe a little bit of sculpture. And in my head, I remember thinking I bet somebody's going to figure out how to sell digital art. Is it going to be video game sales? I don't really know what that's going to look like, but eventually someone will figure it out. And so then as soon as I saw NFTs years later, I was like, oh my God, this could be the thing. And I had, kind of seen what happened with the ICO boom, which, speculation aside, I was really fascinated by the fact that it was this very simple standards-based technology that had a fairly profound impact, right? It was a small amount of code, a huge amount of value was created there. And when I remember reading about or seeing on GitHub, the early discussion around the standard for ERC 721, and just thinking wow, this could be applicable to all internet content. All internet content is an image with a title and a description. that's going to be great. If this takes off, that'll be pretty crazy.
When you first came across NFTs, what were your sort of original aha moments? And specifically, how has that evolved to where you are today? Like, did you get it? You said you got it on the spot, or at least it kind of like rang a bell with you. And did you already see the future of like a product like SuperRare in existence? Or was it a lot of like trial and error? Was there like denial? Like, I'm trying to understand your state of mind in that current moment.
Yeah, so I had seen early, like on Counterparty, there was some, there was like Spells of Genesis and some of these early games and stuff. So I was I was excited about using crypto for, more kind of like consumer tech type experiences. Like I was always wondering what was really going to take off. And it was fairly, like the standard came out around, like I guess there was like CryptoPunks over summer. Then the standard discussion started happening with, like CryptoKitties launching. And I was like, it was pretty early. I was like, like when we first launched, we were like, SuperRare is Instagram meets Christie's. That was kind of like our, elevator pitch that we would give people. And, we heard a lot of like, well, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. But, yeah.
Why do you think you had so much hesitation to begin with? Like, because it really feels like Instagram meets Christie's, like where we are in the current phase of crypto. Like it really feels like that. Why do you think there was so much hesitation at the time?
Just for like the general kind of audience.
Yeah, that ideal vision.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. I think so for us, when we would talk to a lot of the like VCs that we talked to, because like we didn't raise money until we were already like cash flow positive. So it was like kind of like late into the cycle, really. But collecting is this sort of irrational behavior, and so you have people who are like hyper rational trying to like figure out what the market for this like completely irrational behavior is going to look like. And a lot of people were just like CryptoKitties, like volumes are going down. It was like another kind of crypto winter. And I don't know, it was just hard. Like to me, it was obvious. I was like so excited. I was like, look at, there's like, all these different stickers. And like, obviously we're going to have, digital collectibles. They're just as fun as physical collectibles, except they take up no space. They're actually even better. I can have a much larger digital art collection than physical art collection just because I'd have to figure out how to warehouse, thousands of paintings.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's something like a lot of the people who I would talk to earlier were like, why would you do this? It doesn't make any sense. And my response was always like, why does anyone collect anything? Like collecting doesn't make sense. It's not useful. It's not going to help you survive. So I think that's
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. John, something that I really admire about your background and that makes your story super unique is how early you got into crypto. And something that's fascinating for me personally is understanding the narratives of crypto that drive the irrational market. And I feel like you've had exposure to a lot of different narratives. Can you recite any of them or recall like some of the earlier narratives, and have they poised to be true today?
Yeah, it is really interesting. There's certainly the narrative cycles. I feel like Ethereum's a really interesting one. Like when it first came out, it was like the world computer, which was like a kind of like a good narrative. We were talking a lot about shared databases, this world computer concept, and permissionless applications. That's a really interesting one where I don't think it came true, but the shared world computer part, came true. For example, like Super OpenSea, like, these are companies doing like, we're complying with laws. There's no, pretense of like, we're not Bitcoin where it's like, okay, this is, serious decentralization, sovereign money. Like this is, for like gaming or any, just like the NFTs where it's like, it's more like luxury entertainment. So I think like the permissionless applications thing is a narrative that is sort of untrue. But, doesn't really matter. I still think it's super interesting. Like a lot of these companies are doing things that are really interesting. Another narrative I mean, one narrative that was popular at the time that we're seeing a little bit of now is when I first got into Bitcoin, it was Bitcoin and altcoins, and everything else was a scam and it was not going to work. But there were like these application specific ones like Namecoin or Primecoin, or there was all these different, they had like sort of like unique twists. And I think we're seeing that now again, kind of with the different layer ones where they're all some flavor of sharding that's, it's similar but different to Ethereum. And they're doing a way better job of raising venture capital. So I imagine they'll be around longer than, Primecoin or Feathercoin was around. But yeah, that's an interesting one.
That makes sense.
Come back up. Yeah.
What would you say is like the leading narrative today as of February 22nd, 2023? And there's a reason I'm asking this. It's going to transition to the next section, but kind of just to kick it off, any narratives that you're sort of embracing right now, you're realizing as we continue through the bear market?
Yeah, I mean that NFTs really are the mass market moment. Like I think we've seen just, even with the hype cycle in 2021 and where we are today, like, Bored Apes kind of taking over mainstream press and like the huge Beeple sale, even though here we are, still in a bit of a bear market, but we're seeing tons of things, like seeing things happening in music and just like all sorts of different parts of the art market and the explosion of generative art. I think we're still seeing the acceleration of adoption through NFTs, which I think was an early, kind of meme or narrative that is still playing out.
I think part of that, I think you're absolutely right. Part of that comes the conversation around creator royalties that has been a heated debate for the last, I feel like 6-7 months or so. And it feels like every other month there's this new awakening, this new touch point that kind of shakes the entire market. And recently we're coming across like the Blur versus OpenSea marketplace wars, how Blur has now taken, I guess, like majority market share, or at least more than OpenSea at this point. I'm curious if you have any sort of like general thoughts as to what's happening in that world. Yeah,
it's super fascinating. I was actually just emailing back and forth with a couple of our investors. Just, we're in a very different market than Blur and OpenSea is, but I still think, it's this interesting world of, like network effects are different with Web3. Which is something like we've always kind of thought about with SuperRare, like the assets of the content don't live inside of, the one application, like they can be spread across. And so with YouTube, you have this, there's a stickiness in the fact that like your data is all there, right? It's like your username on YouTube may be different from your one on other platforms. And if you wanted to port your entire library to Vimeo or I don't know, whatever, like some decentralized version of it is, that's a whole bunch of work for you to go do. Whereas your whole collection simultaneously on OpenSea, it's on Blur, it's on the next one that comes along. And so the network effects have really changed. And I think we're still figuring out what that actually means. Like no one knows really what's going to happen. But I do think it's interesting, especially for OpenSea and Blur, right? I think there's there's like more tooling around like the speculative component, which I think, is like, common in all markets. And I think that's really important for their core audience, right? Like if you're a speculator, the fees matter quite a lot. And you're like definitely happy to say like, well, screw artist royalties. I'm focused on maximizing returns. Whereas for, art and art collectors and artists, sure, if you buy a piece of art, like I think everyone would be lying if they said there wasn't some part of their brain that's like, it's like, yes, I like the art, but also maybe it'll go up in value. Like that would be cool too. But you also have a personal connection. It's quite common for people to buy art and, start DMing with each other and become friends. And then you're excited to go pay an artist royalty because you're supporting, like you can do both. It's like you can make money reselling art and you're, giving some back to the person who created the value to begin with. So I think we'll see the Blur OpenSea wars continue to heat up, and there's probably going to be new entrants into that space as well. But I think, platforms that are like the SuperRare that have always been very kind of like pro artist and like pro art as like a whole ecosystem are less affected because kind of like the core customers and users are happy to support things like royalties.
Right. Yeah. I love your perspective. I think it's gonna heat up 100%. And it's crazy to see sort of like the vampire attacking.
Dude, the loyalty
incentivization of a
move
token
was savage. I was like, this is crazy.
Wait, talk about that. Share that, because I don't think I'm caught up to speed on that element.
So I don't know if this was yesterday or like maybe it was the day before, but yeah, Blur came out and said their next airdrop for people who are only listing on Blur is going to be way better than if you're also listing cross-platform still. So that was I think that's like, we've seen, that kind of like explosive market share. I think the loyalty airdrop promise has a lot to do with it, which I saw some tweets and I was just like, oh wow, this is going to be fascinating. Like, got the popcorn.
Do you think this is going to force OpenSea to launch a token? Or at least whether it's an ERC20, an NFT, but do something where the community is more incentivized to participate on their marketplace? Or how else will they win?
Yeah, I think they're certainly going to have to do something. I'm in many Discord channels where people are speculating, when OpenSea token. I'm honestly I'm not sure if they're going to launch a token. I think they've they enjoyed their dominant position for quite a while, and I think Blur is like the first person to really come along and challenge them in that secondary market category, and they're gonna have to start either like at least like shipping faster. Like they bought Gem, I don't know, is that 6 months ago, like a year ago? But maybe we see more of the technology merging, like, and kind of see some faster iterations on the user experience. But I'm sure they're probably having a meeting about this right now. I wouldn't be surprised because it's happening so fast. I think that's what's pretty exciting. It's all happening in real time.
When I had Devin on season 3 of Mint, and now we're on season 7. Okay, so a while ago. Okay. The concept of an OpenSea token was still like hot in the market. Like I forgot what marketplace was like threatening them, and they failed. They sort of failed to do it. So like you're right, Blur is like the first sort of like shot that kind of like threatened their comfort at being number one. But I remember when I asked Devin about a token, he's like, and I'm paraphrasing. You're gonna have to go listen to the episode for those who are listening. Listen to the episode to what he actually said verbatim. But as a paraphrase, he's like, it's too early. Like I don't know what would happen like 5 years from now when a token is in place and what the current state of OpenSea will look like. A lot of these DeFi protocols that issued tokens, it's questionable the positions that they're in right now. So it's his perspective was like it's too early, sort of. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but it's too early to sort of like issue a token into the market just yet. I wonder if that tone has changed.
I'm sure it's changed, and it's part of the SuperRare DAO launched August 2021, and the conversation was very much the network effects are different, like we talked about, like there's no stickiness with data in a world where everything lives everywhere and switching costs are almost zero. You need another way to engage the community. Like there's just so I wonder, I'm very curious if they think it's still too early, but and it might be, it's like, who knows who's good. Everyone who comes after the Blur OpenSea war has the advantage of at least seeing how it all played out, right? There's, everyone's learning as we go along.
What do you see SuperRare's role in all of this?
Yeah. So when we launched, we've been focused on art since day one, right? Like, we say the SuperRare mission is to reinvent the economics of human creativity, right? Like we're building tools and want to push things forward that support artists, support the arts. And, we do have, like there's a secondary market on SuperRare, but, it's really not the focus. It's more thinking about how can we support the ecosystem, right? Like we launched artist royalties were part of SuperRare since day one. Having things like collector royalties is also something that, we've experimented with to see how that, how can you align incentives between, producers and consumers of art in a way that's, so like, 1 + 1 is 3 here. And so like, we're really building tools and trying to build, a sustainable art market, right? And that's like, similar to spaces, right? It's like, we saw the need where it's, peer-to-peer is beautiful, but at the same time, there's a reason that gallerists and curators exist, right? It's a full-time job to go properly market, an artist's, most recent releases or drops, right? There's a lot of work that goes into that. And so like building tools that supports this transition of the art market into, the digital space.
Part of creating a sustainable art market, as you sort of alluded to, I guess involves creator royalties, right? What do you see the role of creator royalties sort of playing as the NFT ecosystem grows and you have more threats of marketplaces kind of like, competing with each other? Like, why is a creator in the middle of all of this?
Yeah.
We just want to create, we want to find our audience. Why are you guys putting us at all of this? And it makes sense. It's basic economics, right?
Sure.
And it's all going to zero. Like it was inevitable in my opinion. But in the art of building a sustainable art market, where do creator royalties fit in all this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And one that's, I think we'll only know the answer 10 years from now. But I think, it's been super interesting since the very beginning. We always felt like the beauty of NFTs should be really simple, like enforcing the creator royalty at the NFT level didn't make sense. It makes more sense at the marketplace level. And I think as the market matures, there'll be better tooling to see, what type of collector is this person who's trying to buy this piece of art. So like, I think it's not impossible to imagine a world where, have you, purchased art on, from a creator, and then also kind of like, and they've stated that, they want to have, royalties for this art, but then you go sell it on Blur. Well, if in their next drop, like that's all on chain. So you're like, oh, this is the type of collector that I don't want to work with. And I see creators having more leverage because the market's transparent. And that's in the like kind of like traditional contemporary art world. There's like minimum hold times for pieces of art, and there's kind of notorious, flippers who people, either do or do not want to work with. So I think reputation plays a huge role. And, the beauty of all this is a lot of these transactions are happening on chain. So you can build a fairly good reputational profile just with that information.
Definitely. Something that I'm realizing is as creators become the point of friction next to exchange fees, but creator fees kind of become a point of friction. Or I know SuperRare likes to call them as royalties. We don't like to call them fees.
Yeah.
But it's essentially like you're left with two sort of components in the artist's journey. You have the ability to own the primary sales, and then the thing that comes after the sales, like the relationship, right? And the element of community building. And I feel like now that secondaries has sort of been slaughtered with all the marketplace wars, there's more opportunity to create innovation between those other two categories. And I feel like we've only skimmed the surface with what a primary sale could really look and feel like. Do you have any ideas as to how we could kind of further explore a primary sale beyond just join the drop? Like, does that bring in a world of non-transferable NFTs and build a case for those types, for that token standard? Like, where I'm going with this? Do you have any thoughts around this general area?
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we'll see happening, again, because there is so much information happening on chain. Like, one pattern that I love is bidder editions. I don't know if you've seen any of this. It's, somewhat, I think it was really, photographers really pioneered it on Super. That's the first time I saw it. But, for a one of one, the artist, announces that like after the auction's over, anyone who bid also gets an edition just airdrop to them for participating in the auction itself. And so that, that gamifies it a little bit. It makes the, if you're paying gas fees to participate in an on-chain auction, it makes it a little easier to kind of stomach that. And yeah, I mean, with non-transferable NFTs as well, right? I think we're still figuring out what to do with these building blocks. And I think there's a lot of experimentation, that can be done there.
How do you think this entire war affects curators and tastemakers?
Yeah, this is also a very good question. I mean, I think ultimately, if we like zoom forward, 10 years, I think there'll be like trillions of NFTs, right? There's going to be so much stuff out there. And the tastemaker is going to play an increasingly valuable role. We've put a lot of time and energy into like really trying to pioneer and build models that are equitable in that space. I think like creator royalties, obviously this is great for artists in secondary transactions, but the tastemaker is also an important kind of actor and part of this ecosystem that I don't think is like properly compensated yet. So I think that's an area where there's still work to be done to properly incentivize and reward individuals like that. We've actually been, I'm just gonna drop a little teaser here, but we've been experimenting with a model that allows curators and tastemakers to also participate in upside in a way we think is kind of similarly important to artist royalties. So I can't get too into it. You just keep an eye on the SuperRare forum, but we're going to be posting some new models that explore kind of like new token economic systems to really reward these people who are doing a lot of important work, right? Like the discovery layer, the tastemakers are really helping artists and collectors, right? They're like this kind of like matchmaking role. And so, I'm pretty excited. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that.
Wait, now you have my interest peaked, John. What's going on here? Okay. All right. Let's talk about the SuperRare DAO for a moment, because DAOs were very much a hot thing in the last bull market. When I had Chase Chapman, who's like the DAO queen in her respective community, sort of kind of like pick her brain about what is the current state of DAOs. We both agreed that they're not as hot as they used to be. And I think Masari put out a report that and I could be butchering the number, but if I remember correctly, it's like there's about like 400 DAOs or 800 DAOs and 400 tools that are like venture backed, or 800 tools. It's one of the numbers are
wow.
And it's like the amount of DAOs don't equate to the number of tools. Like it was completely overhyped, or we're just like at the early cusp of what it could be.
Yeah.
And SuperRare, a big component of the SuperRare platform is the SuperRare DAO, rewarding curators with kind of like having a community element of bringing new artists onto the platform, which I love. I love that. I think it's a very cool way to kind of like utilize a token and to incentivize the community properly. I would love to hear your perspective, John. How have your understandings of DAOs sort of evolved pre-SuperRare DAO and post-SuperRare DAO?
Yeah, let's see. I mean, there's a ton of work involved, so it's not like, the DAOs are the magical solution and all of a sudden the hive mind is going to go, solve all your problems. But I think, one thing that has really held true, like before the SuperRare DAO existed, we felt like there was lots of opportunity to make participation, more engaging, right? Like, I don't know how many DAOs you're a part of, or if you're a part of any, but right, you're getting like Discord DMs like, oh, can you go vote on this thing? Can you like, oh, we need more people here to hit quorum, whatever it is. And so for us, when we were like talking with the community and early on thinking about what the DAO could look like, we have this tool for the space race, which is, essentially a governance tool that's custom built just for our DAO. So, there's even one more, DAO tool that probably wasn't even in Masari's report. But it's like application specific, right? This is really just for SuperRare. And the voter turnout for the space race is incredibly high. We see, I think it was almost like 30% of the circulating token supply participating in a couple of these votes, which is, if you think about compared to like, DeFi numbers, that's huge. And it's because, it's not just about, treasury management or, there's important things, but they're also, logistics is kind of boring. So that's not necessarily what people care about. But so, we launched with the space race. I think the hypothesis was correct that if you have, more engaging governance decisions, you'll get higher turnout. There's still a lot of work to do there. I think, we want to continue to experiment with how the community can get involved. But if you do more than just like, create a snapshot group and like have your DAO vote on where to move, tokens around, you can actually get high turnout, which, is one of the most challenging parts of running a DAO.
That makes a lot of sense. What have been the most sort of rewarding experiences navigating through the SuperRare DAO?
I think this kind of the spontaneous conversation that happens with, public forums, like we have a bi-weekly town hall, and just connecting with people, we do, people do like customer interviews or like product research, but having this open town hall forum has been really interesting to hear from people just about, what do they care about, or, what are they concerned about that, they really think that, the DAO should donate to a specific charity or something, or just like, there's a level of engagement that's more open, like it's like a more open conversation. Like we also have like a meta governance and chill session that's just, there's a lot of, and it could be our audience, like specific to our audience, but there are like a lot of creative individuals who think pretty deeply about these things. And since launching the DAO and kind of, trying to be more, or just like having these forums like the town hall and the meta governance and chill, those have been additive in like a non-linear way, just because you're soliciting feedback in a way that's kind of unstructured and allows for this, spontaneous element to be there.
I'm curious if you saw the spending power of collectors increase since the launch of the Rare token. Like now that people feel more incentivized and aligned with the community, and they have a tool that gives them a voice. And I'm curious how that's influenced or affected their spending behavior, or I guess just their general activity on the platform. If you have any interesting insights or metrics to share, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we did time it sort of like in the down, the downward trend. So I think the bear market, the bear market was against us a little bit, but
sure,
I do think, kind of like I mentioned with like Blur and OpenSea and the network effects, the returning numbers for artists and collectors who received Rare in the airdrop is huge. So even if they're not active community governance, participation, they still feel, like they have, like a greater sense of, community ownership, right? I think that just the fact that you can, one of the things I think that's really interesting about tokens is like, it's a new tool for brands to like, you can literally be in somebody's wallet, right? Like if you like, it's this very interesting way to engage the community and customers. That's hard to do in kind of like a, more
Traditional sense, sure.
building sense. Yeah. So I think as far as retention goes, it's like an incredible tool, and it is very powerful for community building. There obviously, but like I said, like there's also a lot of work that goes into that. So yeah, I think you have to, if you're doing it just for the sake of doing it, that's probably not going to work well. Like you do need to build like infrastructure and kind of like habits around actually giving, the DAO some TLC.
I love that. I want to go into some community questions, or at least one specifically that came from Cyber Shakiti. I'm butchering the name.
All right. Yeah.
Cyber Shakti. Okay. Cyber Shakti wants to know your thoughts on how to maintain rarity in the time of open editions.
Ooh, great question. We've actually, this is kind of like the second wave of open editions. So for folks who are around in 2021, the Nifty Gateway open editions were also super hot for a little bit. And so, we had a lot of this conversation. And I think if you have a long-term perspective, then it's a little easier, right? Like to continue to mint one of ones and just think about like, because each artist is also doing community building, right? Like every collector who buys a piece of art, has a direct connection with that artist. And so there's a lot of hype again around open editions. I think they can be an interesting tool for things like, these bidder editions, like I talked about. But at the same time, I think it's a different category. Like we'll see what the market, over the next 10 years, what the market tells us. But I think if you have a more long-term view, it's just show up, you create things that you love, and, connect with your fans and supporters, and you're going to do very well.
Beyond one of ones, digital art, NFTs, are there any subjects that you sort of spend a lot of time thinking about that you haven't publicly talked about yet?
Just in NFTs in general?
Whether it be NFTs, business, entrepreneurship, life, like something that's like how you live your life. I'm curious. I just want to know. I want to get to know you, John.
Gotcha,
behind the rarity.
Yeah. Let's see. As an avid surfer, so I spend a lot of time thinking about what the swell's doing and which board I should bring to the beach. And one thing that's always like part of how I got drawn into this is just like the impact that art has on you as an individual, and like, kind of like, I don't know, I feel like mental health is almost like a buzzword, but it's like the impact that like your environment and art can have on your, just like your well-being, or like whatever we want to say. Like, I think that's super interesting. Like for me, creating my own art has always been kind of like a meditative, like the best way to get out of my head is probably either surfing or making some art. And it helps to have art in your environment that kind of like gets you to, whatever that headspace is for you. So that's just something I think is interesting. And it's interesting too in the relation to NFTs, because there's so much financialization of art happening there. Which, I think is great. It has, downsides as well, as like all technologies do, but those are
okay.
Something I think about quite a bit.
So this might be a far-fetched question as well, and you might think I'm crazy for asking, but have you ever thought about where the world of surfing intersects with Web3 and crypto?
Not deeply, no. Although I have always thought that like, there would be an opportunity to, sponsors, like we could get like a Web3 sponsorship for like, somebody on the pro circuit team. Actually, so I tried to launch a proof of work token that like this project did not go very far past like ideation stage and like, hanging out with a couple people, writing a bit of code, but it was like a proof of work token that would give money to kind of like ocean oriented nonprofits as part of like the mining algorithm. So I think we've seen, I mean, obviously Web3 intersects kind of like charity and donation a lot, but I think that's something that's really interesting, you know, maybe kind of like awareness and sustainability being part of it.
Listen, I learned a lot throughout this conversation. I had a great time with you, John. Thank you for being on. Before I let you go, where can we find you? Where can we learn more? Shill it away.
All right. Yeah. I mean, Twitter is probably easiest. Twitter and Instagram, at SuperRare John. DMs are open on both. So hit me up.
Legend. Thank you for being on. We'll have to do this again soon, but until then, wishing you well.
Awesome, Adam. Yeah, appreciate it. Super fun conversation.